And do you all think that it is still needed to have a computer science degree to learn iOS development, or it is not needed?
In my personal opinion, I don't think it's needed. I think in this day and age, there's many iOS developers who are self-taught or they've come from boot camps and they're doing really good,
What is the demand of iOS developers over there? And if you can tell us about the starting salary an iOS engineer gets in UK?
Entry level, maybe 25 to 50k, mid-level, 50 to 65k, and senior 70k and upwards. That's sort of like a ballpark figure, but these do really vary, so don't take my word for it.
Like they get into that loop of tutorial trap. They keep on reading and learning videos. How to get free from it, because it's never-ending loop.
It makes you feel like you're making a lot of progress because you're learning, but what you don't realize is that the practical side of it, right?
How do you think that AI is revolutionizing the iOS development from code creation to the testing?
AI is able to create code very quickly, right? Something that may take us 10-15 minutes, it can literally do in a minute. You can watch it write the code in front of your eyes. It's like you're holding someone's hand, but they're doing the work for you, kind of.
Hello everyone. In this episode of podcast, we have Simon. Simon is an iOS engineer working in Manchester, UK. He's an iOS engineer for last 3 years. We got his time to give us insight about iOS roadmaps. Anyone who really wants to get into iOS development, who wants to be an iOS engineer or already started iOS development, can get a lot of insight from this particular episode of our podcast. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Hey guys, my name is Simon, as Keshav just mentioned, and I'm a junior iOS developer who currently works for a multinational gaming company called Salaries. I've been developing for about 3 years, and I'm part of the server-side Swift conference, which is happening in London on the 2nd and 3rd of October. So if you're there, please feel to come and have a chat with me. I'll be much appreciated.
Great, Simon. Simon, how did your journey into iOS happen? How you get into iOS development? If you can give us your, a little brief history about it.
Yeah, so when I finished school, I was looking for a degree which allowed me to, work with computers, like computer hardware engineering, for example. And what happened is that I didn't do maths as an A-level, so a lot of the options I had were limited. So I did manage to find a course called Computers of Electronics at the University of Essex, which allowed me to do computer stuff without requiring A-level maths degree, A-level maths. So when I looked at the syllabus for this degree, I noticed that I needed to do programming. Before this point, I'd never done programming. I didn't even want to touch it, but I realized that I've applied and I got the role. So now I need to actually look into it. So what I've done was, in the summer before I started uni, I started to learn a programming language called C. And this was very difficult. I'm not going to lie. It was very, very difficult. But, I learned it and I started to realize I enjoyed it. So now, further down the line, I started to apply for some internships. And this was in my second year of uni, probably. And I managed to get an internship in iOS development. So, okay, cool. Once again, I've done C, I've done C++, but I've never done Swift. So I told the people at the internship, I've never done Swift. This is okay. They said, it's fine. We're going to teach you. So this is actually how I started to be an iOS developer. I didn't choose it. It chose me. You know what I mean?
Great. So when initially you started working in Swift and you started your first job as an intern in your first company, was there any challenges that you faced? And if you faced, how did you overcome them?
I would say that the transition from going to uni to working in a professional company is quite different. So, there's a lot sort of higher expectations, and you feel like you're not in the right place. You feel like you're not qualified enough to be there because your skills do not match what other people are doing. But what I learned is that you just need to understand that you're still learning, you're still a junior, right? So it's gonna be a long path, but you will get there eventually. So as long as you focus on yourself and you keep on building, you'll become good and you'll become more useful to the company.
Great point over there. So what makes iOS development so promising career path today that you chose to become an iOS engineer?
So I'll say that when I go to work, right, I see a lot of iPhones, I see a lot of iPads, I see a lot of laptops, right? This shows you that Apple has got quite a big mobile market share. So whenever you're creating apps for Apple, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be using it, right? there's also a lot of innovation. With Swift, SwiftUI, VisionOS, there's a lot of new features that are coming out, which means that you're able to meet like the customers' sort of needs a lot better. The salary is also very good. iOS developers in general get paid quite well, and there's a clear sort of career ladder that you can climb. You start as a junior, you move to a mid, then you go to senior, and even if you're trying to go a bit higher, you can become a principal, which is sort of the peak. And it's also very flexible. Most iOS developers, from my experience, are able to work from home and work from the office, and some have been blessed with the fact that they're able to work fully remote, right? So that's some of the reasons why being an iOS developer in this day and age is a good idea.
Great. But since you are working in UK, what is the demand of iOS developers over there? And if you can tell us about the starting salary an iOS engineer gets in UK?
I would say that the demand is quite high, especially in these sort of tech hubs, which is like London and Manchester, right? There's a lot of startups, there's a lot of big tech companies that want to create very polished products, right? And to do that, they need to create native iOS apps. And in terms of salary, it really does vary depending on what company you work for and where this company is based. But to give you sort of a ballpark, entry level, maybe 25 to 50K, mid-level, 50 to 65K, and senior 70K and upwards. That's sort of like a ballpark figure. But these do really vary, so don't take my word for it.
Got it. So since you are you started recently into iOS development, what suggestion that you have to make for anyone who is getting into iOS engineer? Like what about the basic programming principles they can follow or they can learn so that they can excel better in their career?
Some of the fundamentals that would be a good idea to learn are variables, constants, and data types, such as like strings and integers. And then you want to move into sort of like the control flow. So this would be like if, else, for loops, and switch cases. And then I would sort of try to learn about functions and scope. When I say scope, I mean like private, public, file private, all these kind of things.
Access modifier.
Pardon?
Access modifier.
Yeah, thank you. There we go. Access modifiers. You want to look into optionals. Optionals are very, very important. I think a similar thing to optionals is Nullable and Kotlin if you've ever worked with Kotlin. And you want to look at the object-oriented side of Swift. So classes, structs, and inheritance. And then you want to finish off with protocols and extensions. I think if you learn those basics, you have a good foundation and start an iOS development.
Great. And how important is to learn about Xcode? Because we always do programming on Xcode, right? Because I think it has a lot to offer.
Yes, Xcode is like the Apple's official IDE for developing on the iOS platform, right? And to put it simply, Xcode is the easiest way that you're going to be able to put your app in the App Store. Because what happens is to get your app in the App Store, you need something called an app binary, which Xcode is able to produce. Now, there are other ways of creating this app binary using like the CI and stuff, but that's very complicated. So most people will use Xcode to actually create the app binary to upload to the App Store. In terms of the general features, it's a code editor, it's got auto-completion, it's got, debugging and profiling tools. And importantly, it's got a simulator. So you're actually able to test different, old device, new devices, iPads, and watches. So your apps can be tested. You don't actually need to own these devices. You can use a simulator to see how they would look like and how they behave. And last but not least, there's an interface builder. So this is more storyboards in UIKit, but it's still, if you're working with legacy code, it's still important that you're able to, drag and drop elements and actually build an app.
So I think anyone who is a solo engineer and who really wants to start into iOS development, they don't have to buy a lot of devices. They can use the base feature of simulators. They can test their applications on multiple devices via simulator. If they want to publish their app, they can use it through the developer's account and connecting it with the Xcode and just publish the app to the App Store, connect from there itself. They don't have to go for the CI/CD if they don't want it.
Yeah.
Right. So I also see a lot of engineers who are getting into, they get trapped into tutorials trap, they get into that loop of tutorial trap. They keep on reading and learning videos. How to get free from it? Because it's never-ending loop.
Yeah, so as Kashaf just explained, the tutorial tab is basically where you watching a lot of tutorials and you read a lot of content, which is good, but you're not actually using what you've learned to create a project or actually create code, right? So this is not great because it makes you feel like you're making a lot of progress because you're learning. But what you don't realize is that the practical side of it, right? The problem solver side of it. So when you're actually writing code and creating projects, there's a lot of things that the tutorial doesn't talk about. So it's really, really important that you actually learn the tutorials, maybe watch 1 or 2 tutorials maximum, and then go and actually build. Use what you learn from the tutorial and recreate the project or create something similar using those skills. That's going to consolidate, what you've learned.
And how important is the consistent practice? Because you have to consistently develop, putting into effort of what you have learned. How important is that?
Well, I'd say the biggest thing is that, tech changes very quickly, so it's very important that you're always learning new things, because if you don't keep up, you will be left behind. And yeah, you may be senior, you may know what you're doing with an old framework, but now there's new frameworks that are way more powerful, right? So it's important that you take your time, use the new tech tools that you've learned. Obviously, consolidate what you've learned before, use it if applicable, but also take your time to delve into some of the new tools and use those in your apps and practice, solving problems with these new tools. Repetition is very important because it's reinforcement, right? The more you do something, the better you become at it, and the easier it is to,
So basically, with the repetition, it comes with the muscle memory, and that is very important to master anything. So rather than going into tutorial trap, try to learn, implement what you have just learned, and do it on a repetitive process. Yeah. That's the only way to master it. Great point over there. As a beginner who is getting started into iOS development, should they learn UIKit or should they learn SwiftUI?
That's a good question. I think that's a lot of beginners are going to see that, because there's going to be tutorials for UIKit and SwiftUI, and they look like they're both being used quite prevalently. So if you were to ask me as a junior developer, I would say learn SwiftUI first. It's more beginner friendly and it's more modern. It's the newer language, right? So when you join a job, you're more likely to use SwiftUI than UIKit. Having said that, it is also very important to, take a look at UIKit and actually learn how to use it. Just because, yes, everyone's going to be coding in SwiftUI, but a lot of the legacy code in these big companies are all in UIKit. So it's really, really important to actually learn how to use UIKit. But if you're a beginner, definitely start with SwiftUI.
Great. And do you all think that it is still needed to have a computer science degree to learn iOS development, or it is not needed?
In my personal opinion, I don't think it's needed. I have a degree, right? But I do not think it's needed. I think in this day and age, there's many iOS developers who are self-taught, or they've come from boot camps and they're doing really good, I think it's more important for employers to see the skills that you have than, the degrees that you have. So definitely, I don't think it's required.
And if you talk about the common mistakes the developers can, stop doing, what could be is that regarding app testing, how important is to test the app on the real device before publishing the app to the App Store? Do you think that is also important? No, testing on simulators are off.
It's very important as developers, especially me, using a simulator is convenient. As you said, you don't need the device. You can test on loads of different devices using a simulator. But there's going to be certain edge cases you can't test, right? So for example, with a physical device, you'll be able to see how your app handles, network issues, or how much battery it actually drains. And, older devices are not as powerful as newer devices. So your app may work fine on a new device, but when you actually go to an old physical device, it's not powerful enough to handle what you've done. So this can, point to some memory issues, or maybe you need to make your app more efficient. And on top of this, obviously your simulator doesn't have a GPS, it doesn't have a camera. So if your app uses these features, it's important to actually test these out in a real device.
Since you talk about camera, how important it is to adhere to the Apple Store's, guidelines?
Well, to put it quite frank, Apple's like, they're the big boss, right? If you don't follow their rules, you say, can I please put my app there? They're going to tell you no. It's as simple as that. So, it's really, really important that you follow their Apple guidelines, right? Because they've put them there to protect themselves and also to protect you. Because by following the guidelines, it protects you from some security and potential privacy violations that you could be making. So it's really important to do what they say.
How important it is to look for the security aspect of app development.
You're often under a lot of deadlines. You want to create this feature, you want to fix this bug, and security is sort of like a second thought. So I think it's definitely a big issue that we're having, in general. So I think some ways you can go into security, look into using encryption, secure storage, or having proper authentication, which basically stops people that are not like identified or people that shouldn't be entering your app from entering your app. And I think a very big point that people don't seem to remember is actually updating your dependencies. As I say, tech moves very fast, and with tech moving very fast, people find more vulnerabilities, right? And these libraries / framework owners are aware of these vulnerabilities, and they push out updates to the packages or the libraries to stop these vulnerabilities from being a thing. But if you yourself, as an app developer, have not updated your dependencies, you're not going to be able to get those updates. So you're going to be, open to attack.
It is also very important to take care of the security from the perspective of keychain, where you want to store data and all those sort of things. Being a junior engineer, it is really easy to overlook and avoid the memory management. People don't do it, right? And that leads to retain cycle and app crashes. How do you think we can sort it out?
So we have something called ARC. ARC stands for Automatic Reference Counter, right? And it's basically like a automatic memory management system that like deletes, like frees up storage basically whenever it's not being used. And let me explain to you how it works, right? So when a class is created, that instance has a counter, like a reference counter, right? So whenever a property or variable from that class is being referenced, the counter goes up by 1. And whenever the reference goes away, the counter goes down. Like an example of the reference going away is that the property that you were referencing is maybe gone out of the scope or it's been set to 0. So the counter would go down. And this works perfectly fine, right? Once the counter goes to 0, your class is deleted because it means nothing is basically using it. So it can be deleted and can free up space. And this works fine. However, as you just mentioned, a retain cycle, which is basically a strong reference cycle. And this can happen at least when two classes are basically referencing each other, which stops them from deallocating themselves so they can't be thread, right? So if just to like visualize it, if I have a child class that has a parent property and I have a parent class that has a child property, that's an example of how they sort of link to each other. Now, the way to get over this is to use something called weak references. So weak references are very similar to strong references, but they have two sort of differences. One is that weak references don't add 1 to the counter. So when you have a reference that's weak and you're looking at like a property, the counter's not going to go up. And second of all, the object can be deleted even though it's got these weak references like pointing to it. So what does this mean? In the child and parent case, if we have a weak reference to the child and a weak reference to the parent, it doesn't count as anything. So if the class is not being used anywhere else, those references will be deleted automatically. And that means that retain cycle is broken, that retain cycle is broken. And also very, very importantly, it's actually using the tools that Xcode provides. So they have these sort of profiling instruments, which can tell you if you have any leaks in your app and how much memory your classes are being used. So if you see like spikes in leaks or spikes in memory allocation, look into this.
Got it. So basically, whenever you are trying to reference to anything child or maybe closures, protocols, always use basically a Wikify solution to it. It will be really helpful because you don't have to bother about ARC and memory management in that case. So no harm using Wikify. And we also think about accessibility. Nowadays, it's a talk a lot. It's been in a talk a lot. But being an engineer, we always overlook it. We always consider about accessibility at the very end of our development. Do you think it is right? And if it is right, okay, good. If it is not, then how we can, think of it as a process of our development itself?
Yeah. Okay, so I think it's wrong. I think everyone should have equal access to the apps that we create, right? And treating accessibility as a sort of bolt-on often leaves people with disabilities excluded and to the point where they can't even use your app, right? So what people don't realize is that if you bake accessibility in during your development process, it actually turns out being a lot cheaper than if you were to retrofit it and add it in after. So it's really important that as you're developing, you have accessibility in mind. And you have to understand that improving accessibility doesn't just impact the people that have accessibility issues, right? It also impacts everyone. A good example of this is like captions, the amount of people that use captions when they're watching, YouTube videos or Netflix. So it's really, really important to improve accessibility because you don't know who else is helping. And what you'll notice is that apps that have really good accessibility functions get more positive reviews in the App Store. And, as we know, the more positive App Store reviews you have, the more likely your app is going to, someone's going to click on it and say, okay, it's got good reviews, let me try it out. So these things are really, really important.
Okay. And how do you think that, compromising the user, compromising the user interface, impacting the app success? If there is no collaborative communication between designers and the developers, how that can impact the overall success of the app? Because then there will be something which is not better UX, something which is not better UI, and overall it will impact the app success. How important the communication between designer and developers are?
Okay, so let me sort of set the scene. When people think of Apple, they normally think of, premium quality. So all the apps that Apple have made in the Apple ecosystem, they look good, they're simple to use, they have clean designs. So imagine if a user now clicks on your app and the design is not very, very good and it's very, very hard for them to use. They're going to want to delete the app, right? There's many apps that do the same thing as you with way better design and way better user experience. So they're just going to switch over. So a big thing of having poor UI is that it causes people to delete apps quicker, right? So this is where, that relationship between developers and designers comes in. Especially even me at work, I work closely with the designers, right? So it's a two-way sort of communication street. So from a developer to a designer scenario, right? Designers, they're very, very creative people. They create beautiful, beautiful designs. But sometimes these designs are not feasible, like you can't code them. So it's really important that you, at the beginning of the development process, tell them that, can we just tweak it a little bit? And they'll make the little changes, but that little tweak can actually mean that you're able to have a clean design, but actually, and make it look beautiful, but it actually be sort of feasible. You can actually build the app and actually create that design in code. And then the other way, a developer may, create some functionality, like a specific user flow. And then the designers will tell you that, hold up a second, I see what you're doing, but this isn't as simple as it may seem, right? So the designer will tell the developer, could you maybe change this and change that? Because some users are going to trip up on this and get lost. So it's important that developers and designers are, aligned and try and build a product that looks good, but also works well and is easy to use for customers.
And we often think, like being a junior engineer, we often overlook the style guidelines, comments on the code. Writing code which is clean, that will impact the collaboration between different developers because they can understand our code. Also for the overall project health, we often leave the company, but the code is still there and it will be there. Correct. Right? How important it is to take care of these points.
So I think that clean code, readability and commenting it's very, very important, I think the issue what people have is that when they write not very clean code and code that's not very readable, they're the ones developing it, right? So I understand it, so everyone else must understand it, right? But what happens is that, fine, it works, it's good, but later down the line, when your teammate needs to work on this feature, they're going to pick up and they're going to look at it and think, I don't understand what's going on. And they're going to have to waste a lot of development time just reaching out to you and trying to sort of understand what you've done. So it's better that you write clean code and make it readable. And if it's a complex function or complex functionality, add a bit of commenting, Style guides, I think, is also very important because they like to organize the code in different ways, which is fine. But when you're in a company, it's better to have a standard, right? Because with a standard, it allows the brain to sort of get used to seeing, okay, I'm expecting the functions to be here, the variables to be here, the public variables here, private variables here, there's a way you can set out. So this is going to help you make it easier for you to navigate the code base, right? Because you understand, you can tell where things are going to be. And on top of this makes it easier for like new devs to onboard in the future. So they're going to see that, cool, this is how they like to code. This is how they like to set it up. The code is clean. The code is easy to understand. It's been broken down well. So this is really, really important. Also, later down the line, you're going to have bugs, you're going to have issues, right? And if your code is clean and it's been laid out in a consistent way across multiple different parts of the code base, it's going to be way easier to debug it, right? And it's going to be way more quicker. And it also is good for future proofing.
Very important. So thinking of completing the task now, or rather thinking of completing the task in a way which can be easily done in the future also is very important. And how do you think it is very important for an engineer to not just code or develop things at their job, but rather developing and creating their own personal apps on their own is important for iOS development skills?
I'd say that at work, you get your task given to you, you can't really decide what you learn. They tell you, you need to do this, we need to fix this. That's fine. You learn from these things, but there may be certain things that you want to learn that you can't learn because it doesn't fit into the ticket that you're doing. So this is why it's very important that outside of work, you have your own sort of project that, you're using to learn skills, you're using to solidify information. You're creating things from scratch because, in your code base at work, it's a big, most likely at least, it's a big code base. And many smart people, many seniors have already created things, for you and made it easier for you to use. You need to understand and experience the problems that come when you build from scratch, and understanding these problems and solving them in your own project will help you to gain a deeper understanding into what you're actually doing. And this also allows you to see what your strengths and weaknesses are when you're actually coding on something that you own. You can see, I'm good at this and I'm bad at this, which can help you to, draw a roadmap on the things that you need to improve in the future. And also lastly, it helps you to build a portfolio, for later on, maybe if you go into an interview, you can show them your app and you can show them, okay, this guy's got these skills and he's going to be a good fit for this role.
And how can be, as you said about demonstrating your skill and demonstrating your projects, how can the platforms like GitHub be leveraged to demonstrate their their skills of development?
Okay, cool. So let's say you've got your project right, and you've been using GitHub, you've uploaded on GitHub. I think the most important thing is to create a README file. README is basically when the user opens your repo, it's like instructions which include how to set it up and what it does, some screenshots maybe of the app, and it just talks about sort of what you've done. It's kind of a way where you sort of onboard a new user onto your project, right? So it's really important that you get this README file right and you have the right amount of information there, because what happens is that if you're telling people, look at what I've built, they may not have time to look at the app, but they may have time to, just to read the README and get a good idea of what you've done. So it's really, really important. Another aspect that I think people overlook is sort of committing, the commit history, because the commit history shows a lot of things. It shows how good you are sort of grouping your work together, and it can show evidence of, problem solving. You've implemented a feature, and then a few commits down the line, you'll see, oh, okay, I've actually had to implement a fix because I've done something that works, but there's some edge cases. So it's good for a employer to see that, okay, this guy makes mistakes, but he's also able to fix them. And last but not least, I'd say contributing to open source projects. So, you've got your own project, they can see that you know how to build, but what about other people's code where you're not very as comfortable, but contributing to open source software, you're able to show that I can jump onto other people's projects, read the code, and actually make meaningful contributions.
What do you think that common mistakes engineers do when they're preparing for the interview or giving the interviews?
Okay, so I would say many don't take their time to sort of understand the fundamentals. They learn it, but they don't, understand it. So it's really, really important because, as I mentioned earlier, they like to ask these sort of, design pattern questions. So it's very important that you take the time to read up on them. And, they've taken the time to practice some interview questions, which is really, really important. However, this isn't an exam where, you actually take your time to understand it. Because what happens is that, okay, they'll ask you the interview question, what does this mean? And what is this design pattern? Then they're going to add on top of that, in what scenario would you use this? And this is where the understanding is very, very important, right? Because you know what it is on paper, but you don't actually understand how it works and what it does and when to use it. So it's really, really important. Take your time to understand.
And as you said about how you set up with the team, how cool you are, how people are going to remember you, how important it is to have, or what approach one should take when giving the behavioral interview? Because technical interview is good. How about clearing up the behavioral interview? What approach one should take to clear it out?
I would say when you're answering these questions, try to highlight certain sort of aspects, certain sort of, checkboxes. So for example, like how you work in a team, your problem solving capabilities, or how adaptable you are to, quick changing situations. So when you ask these questions, try and give a real life example of, maybe when you've done these things, and also be sure to highlight the things I just mentioned, right? So that they can see that, yeah, you know how to handle these situations, but you're also good at, teamwork and problem solving and being adaptable and changing. Because at work, there's a lot of these things like solving problems, working in a team, and being adaptable to changes to requirements is really, really important.
Exactly. And you're faking yourself. And even though they hire you, even you try to fake them properly, they will know the real you when you start working with them. So it's better to be authentic. Yeah, it's better to be authentic with them.
Cannot hide forever.
Exactly, you can hide forever. We talk about this, like, okay, so what advice you want to give to the people who really want to clear the job interview in this competitive environment? There is a lot of layoffs going on. Market really is in a bad situation. There are a lot of good people who really want a job, who are really doing job seeking right now. What advice do you want to give them so that their profile will be standing out?
First of all, I'm really big about this portfolio thing, have apps, have these repos. Seeing is believing. Like if they can see something that they can actually use the app, it's going to be way more impressive than you describing that I can do this, I can do that. Okay, you can do it. Show me. You know what I mean? So having that apps and like showing your repos is really, really important. As I said again, contributing to open source shows that you're able to jump on other people's projects and able to make meaningful contributions, right? You're able to, add value. This is something they need because it's like when you, apply and you get a job, you're basically jumping on somebody else's code base. So it's really important to be able to know how to handle that and navigate that kind of sort of transition.
So I was really inspired by that line, seeing is believing.
Yeah, I love it. I used it twice now. Networking is very, very important. Give you more visibility, right? And the people that you meet at these talks, especially when you start going regularly, you'll notice it'll be the same people. And these are the people that are really, really deep in the iOS world, and they got deep, deep connections, right? So it's really important that you go and talk to these people, get to know them, and see the things that they're working on, because you never know, maybe that's where one of your job opportunities or collaboration opportunities comes from, right? So it's really, really important. Network, very, very important. Get to know people that are in the same field as you.
How do you think that AI is revolutionizing the iOS development from code creation to the testing?
That's a very, very big, AI is good at taking your code base, looking at it, it's got, it's a computer. It can read so many files so quickly, way quicker than you ever could, right? And it's able to create an understanding and is able to describe to you what this code base does and the different parts of the code base and how they work together. Especially as someone that is new to the code base, for example, it's that understanding. You may have the skills, but you don't have the understanding to apply your skills, right? So you can ask AI, how does this function work and how does this system work? And by getting this understanding, you're going to be able to fix bugs. You'll be able to, start editing functions because AI has helped you to understand and it's been able to get context from the broader app and the broader code base, right? And then the second part is the creation, right? The code generation. AI is able to create code very quickly, right? Something that may take us, 10, 15 minutes, it can literally do in a minute. You can watch it write the code in front of your eyes. So it's really, really good for once you got that understanding and the AI's got the understanding of what you want to do, you can tell it, can you please implement this? It's very important to watch what it's doing because obviously it's just AI. It doesn't know everything. So it's like you're holding someone's hand, but they're doing the work for you, kind of.
Do you think that in the future, hyper-personalization of the applications gonna happen through the machine learning? Because Netflix are doing, platforms like Netflix are doing it, right? Because they want to have a personalized data, the models, so that they can know their user better. How do you think that will happen in the future for the applications itself?
Man, I think it's going to be like a very, very big deal because AI is able to it can see your patterns. It can see what you do. It sees what you like and what you don't like. And this means that it's able to give you personalized recommendations and even send you notifications, based on your gambling or like your using patterns of a specific app, right? So it's also able to understand what you like and get the feedback from the app saying like, this guy likes to click on this button, but he doesn't like to click on this button. And it's able to shift the way your UI looks to make it more.
This guy continue on this particular flow of the application and then come back. This guy did not continue on this particular flow. This guy did not completely like this particular flow. This guy came back. So they know more about your preferences, about different sections of the applications itself, right?
So it's able to get the information, like they study your behaviors, right? As you said, they can see that you clicked on this button and when you went to the next screen, all of a sudden you didn't want to continue. And this allows them to sort of rejig the UI or, rejig the specific content that shows you for something that's a bit more personal. And if you can have a personal, unique experience in an app that's tailored specifically to you, and you feel like, this is perfect, like, damn, they really know what I want. It's going to keep like users engaging your app and it's going to keep them like in the app. The retention is going to go up because it's like an app for them, It's like an extension of the body almost.
And do you think a lot of enterprise applications are right now being developed in Certo and it's a cross-platform? Do you think that's going to be a norm, or our native application is going to obsolete? Or no, like this is not going to happen. Our native application is going to be there. A lot of enterprise is going to continue with that.
That's a good question. A lot of people have that on their mind. Because obviously, when you do native development, you need to hire Android developers, you need to hire iOS developers, which is very expensive. Or you can go to cross-platform where you have one code base, one set of developers, and they're creating, the apps for both iOS and Android at the same time. So this saves time and this also saves money.
Considering this discussion, what do you think about the future outlook of iOS UI development, SwiftUI or UIKit? What is the current status and what is the future outlook of SwiftUI and UIKit?
As I mentioned before, SwiftUI is the more modern language, and it is sort of coming up now. Any new app that you see in the App Store most likely has been built using SwiftUI, right? But you do have to remember that UIKit is more mature, it's more stable, and it's used a lot, especially in the old code bases, which a lot of our apps have been built on UIKit. It's their bread and butter, right? So I think that Apple will pivot more towards putting new features into SwiftUI, but they will also still try and, wherever possible, cater for the UIKit, people, because there's a lot of code that's been written in UIKit. So they still, look after them and add features, but they're going to heavily focus on SwiftUI. That's what I would say. SwiftUI and Swift in general.
So in iOS 26, they came up with a declarative approach for the UIKit. This shows that Apple is not going to get rid of UIKit very soon. However, they're gonna, as you said, they're gonna put a lot of effort in the SwiftUI, but they don't gonna leave UIKit also behind. They're gonna continue with that. So what are the key takeaways you want to give for aspiring and current iOS developers in today's rapidly growing tech market?
Be patient and be persistent with the process. Like when you look at it and you zoom out, like, whoa, it's a massive mountain you have to climb. Just start, every day, do little by little, start by learning, watching the tutorials, and then creating and building. I think that's your bread and butter. Learn and then build. It's the learning gets the information in the brain. The building sort of imprints the information. So I think that's very, very important.
Final encouragement you want to give to the iOS developers who really want to get into iOS development and who are into iOS development and started their journey?
There's a lot of iOS developers out there, so it can be quite discouraging, especially when you're going through all these interviews and they're not accepting you. But the best way to go, in my opinion, is to learn from your mistakes. When you fail, you learn, because as long as, even if you're getting better just 1% every day, small things that compound and they turn into big things. It just takes that one interview, just takes that one job, it's that next job application. You don't know if you apply to it, you may get it. Don't give up. You know what I mean? So keep on going. You will get it eventually. Trust me, especially if you're keeping improving after every single interview that you don't get through,
Great. Thank you, Simon. Thank you for this great session, for this great insight that you gave to our viewers and users. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.